I'd like to introduce Kelley Bermingham. Thank you so much, Kelley, for coming along. Kelley is the Community Officer at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and she served on the LCDC, which is the Local Community Development Committee, since 2019 in Dublin City. So this evening, she's going to share her own knowledge and her experience from her time on the committee, and then there'll be lots of time for Q&A afterwards as well. And we're hoping to get you out here around 8:30. So we'll crack on in. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction. And pressure is for tires, as the fellow says. But I'm going to share a little presentation, and hopefully it will work if I can. Witness, you know. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Great. So I am, as I've already been introduced, Community Officer in St. Patrick's Cathedral. And I suppose I'm also the Safeguarding DLP, and my experience has led me to work there in the capacity of Community Officer because I'm a community trained person. I've actually I have a diploma in Higher National Diploma in Social Care. I have a degree in facilitation. I went back to college in 2014. I worked in mental health for about 15 years. Community work has been probably my bread and butter since I was 5 years old. I worked in a household where I was a compulsory volunteer and had lots of need coming through the house. So my parents were quite the activists and did an awful lot in their time. So that was really interesting. I'm sorry, I'm seeing my slides. Are they presenting properly for you guys?
We can see them, but it's not on the presenter view. It's just on the...
I don't know why that's not working. And apologies for this now. And just to say as well that as we go through this, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the... it's not actually anyway, it's fine because it'll all come into play. But if you have any questions, drop them into the chat box.
Yeah,
and
it's Gina here. Hi, how are you? 3 minutes
Gina.
late. If you can explain it for blind or visually impaired people that can't see it as you go, just the main point, that'd be great if possible.
I didn't quite catch what you said. Sorry, Gina.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it just didn't come through that clearly to me.
Oh, I'm just saying if you can explain as you go for blind or visually impaired people.
I will, absolutely.
Possible. Thanks very much, because I'm
no problem.
Impaired.
Well, what I've put up...
Thanks a million.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks, Gina. So what I've put up is actually just a plain blue slide with the cathedral logo where I work in St. Patrick's Cathedral and a photo of myself. I've got glasses, I've got long kind of brown hair and brownie blonde. It's bottle blonde now. And my title is PPN Community Rep, and I sit on the LCDC, and I'm here to just give an overview of what that position entails. And that just gives me a chance to, I suppose, introduce who I am in the first instance and how I came to be there. So I started working in St. Patrick's Cathedral in 2016. And that was the result of I had done a voluntary placement with them as part of my course when I went back to college in All Hallows to do a liberal arts degree that involved and focused on facilitation as its core element. And I did a study on the volunteering programme and made some recommendations about how they might change and adapt it and just the various different opportunities that existed. And then they invited me to apply for a job that I thought had already been filled. And I was delighted to succeed in getting that job. There was a little bit of a blip and I went to Kildare for a year and a half. And that was just as a result of COVID. So I'm going to change slide now, and the next slide is literally a list of the Dublin City LCDC membership. Now, I was invited to go on board. I was approached actually by a city councillor at the time. You probably know Mannix Flynn, who's a Dublin City councillor, and he approached me and said, would you be interested in being a PPN rep? And I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. Not a bog's notion. I literally was oblivious. And they say ignorance is bliss, but actually it's hard work when you get into it. So I actually really had no notion of what I was letting myself in for. He gave me the forms. He said, "Oh, sure, look, you can go along to your meetings and all will be well, and you'll learn as you go along." And I just trusted the process. And my very first thing to say to him was, "I'm not interested in a talk shop. I want a group that where I'm going to actually be able to make a difference. I want to be able to contribute positively and constructively to decision making and change that can happen within our city. And if it's just a talk shop, I'm out." So I'm just letting you know that in advance, if I find that that's all it is. So I'm very cynical about bureaucracy and, you know, the machines and how slowly they move. So having been on the outside of it, actually, I went in with that cynicism first and foremost, and it was probably a healthy dose of cynicism. But I walked into my very first meeting and it was just ridiculous. I had not got a clue what I was going into. Dahi Downey was the then chief executive. He's now gone, and it is Shauna McIntyre who's in place. And she's fantastic. She took over. Dahi was a very ambitious individual. He said yes to everything and got a lot done, in fairness to him. Delegated, I feel sorry for his team. He delegated a huge swathe of work to his very small and capable team. And I'd say they really do over and above what is expected of them within their roles. So that first meeting, I was bamboozled. I met councillors that I'd never met before. I'd never seen them at any of the community events that I'd been involved in across the city. And, you know, they were talking about things in acronyms, the world of acronyms. So I laugh when I kind of say to people, well, I'm on the DCC, PPN, LCDC, and we're working on the development of the LECP, and we're also distributing the LEP fund. And that's the response I get, a blank look, because that's what it was like when I went into my first meeting. Everybody knew the acronyms, they knew what they stood for, but they didn't actually, when I asked a question, I'd say, "Sorry, what does that stand for?" And they go, "Oh, what does it actually stand for?" They knew what it meant, but they actually had forgotten what the iteration of the words were articulating in lots of cases. Because there are just so many working acronyms that are referred to throughout the meetings. That was very, very difficult. And I asked for that to be demystified and a list to be put together of the usual acronyms that are used. So in fairness, they did actually go to those lengths, and, you know, they put together that list and they reduced the number of acronyms that they used. So from the very first request, I was actually part of the team. I was respected. As you can tell, I'm very shy. I tend not to ask questions. I didn't kiss the Blarney Stone. I bit it and swallowed a chunk of it. So I tend to push in and ask questions. And if I'm not embarrassed to say I don't understand something, I'll actually say, "I really don't know what you're talking about. Can you just bring that back and let me know in a little bit more kind of simple language or layman's terms what it is that you actually mean by that?" And for some people who are working at a very high abstract level, they find that very challenging and very difficult. But in fairness, they all do try to kind of bring it back to the basics. And then sometimes something will come out of that explanation and that conversation, and it'll lead to another result. So this is the profile that on this slide, I have a list of the names of the membership, and it's split into two sections: the public sector members and then the private sector members. Councillor Carolyn Moore has been there since my previous iteration, and after my year and a half in County Kildare, when I came back, I was nominated to go back on. And I was delighted to accept. I was very privileged to accept that nomination. And Councillor Carolyn Moore is still the chair. And I'm thrilled about that because she's really committed. Some of the councillors pony up and say, "Yes, I'd love to be part of that." And they might attend a couple of meetings now and again when there's a hot issue that maybe favours their election matters or whatever is on the table for them at the time. But there are very few who come along consistently to the meetings. One of the people I see here who's very consistent is Vincent Jackson. Supriya Singh dials in quite a bit because I think she lives further away from city centre. Most of our meetings are in person with a hybrid option. And then Councillor Conor Reddy is next. He's been at a couple of the meetings. I think he missed maybe one or two. Frank Darcy from Dublin City Council tends not to be at all of the meetings, but his equivalent, Shauna McIntyre would explain and report to him, or would bring something to the table if there was a specific issue that he was bringing to bear in the group. Then Greg Swift has actually just retired, which we're really sorry about, because he was the local enterprise officer, LEO for short, another one of those little acronyms. He's a man about town. He knew everything to do with social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, getting business started, the issues for local economic business planning in the community across the entire city. Would have known his counterparts in the respective local authorities surrounding Dublin City. So a great guy on the ground, and he's going to be sorely missed. Talk about a well-seasoned, well-connected man. He was just a pleasure to work with. Ellen O'Dea from the HSE, the Health Service Executive. So she is at some of the meetings, not all of them. She's a very sincere, forthright lady, and actually would have brought up quite a few important statistics in relation to health issues when we're discussing different matters. So for instance, when we mentioned the Purple Flag campaign, she raised the fact that the Purple Flag is sponsored by alcohol organisations and alcohol providers, and I didn't realise that. So that was interesting, because 17% of the admissions over the Christmas period were all alcohol related. And that's just very interesting from a health perspective. Caoimhe Cairns then from the City of Dublin Education Training Boards, or CDETB for short. She made a presentation recently about the value of adult education in particular, and the different strategies that are taking place through the CDETB, and the fact that the Reach Fund is open for applications. I think it's still open, so if you have a need for funding, that's definitely one to go for. It's an incredibly flexible fund, let's say, much less strings than some of the other funding streams that come through. The private sector members then, we have Rabia Tabassum, and I hope I've correctly pronounced that. She's on the social inclusion pillar for the PPN. And then we have Scott Chang, a social inclusion pillar. I think both Rabia and Scott have been at a couple of the meetings so far since I've returned. Dr. Badmus, Akeem Omatayo Badmus, he's on the PPN, and he actually sits on the subcommittee of the finance group. So would be making decisions around the financial grant applications and supporting the decision making on that. I sat on that on my previous iteration, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a little while. Then there's myself, and then Claire Wheeler, who's on the environmental pillar. Is Claire with us this evening? Hopefully she is, because Claire's always at the meetings and always has something to contribute in relation to the environmental issues that would be on her radar. Anne Fitzgerald from the Ballyfermot Chapel is a partnership. Now that's renamed as the Liffey Partnership, and this list is as it stands on the Dublin City Council website, but there are a couple of things that just need to be updated on that, including the name change from Ballyfermot Chapel is a partnership to the Liffey Partnership, because it doesn't just cover Ballyfermot and Chapel is, it extends into parts of Inchicore, Bluebell and Fox and Geese and a couple of other areas. Then we have Paul Rogers, Northside Partnership. Anybody who's involved in anything to do with the Northside probably knows Paul Rogers and has had dealings with him at some point or other. That man is a genius when it comes to the SICAP funding and all the various different initiatives that are happening north of the Liffey. Dr. Derek O'Brien, who's the North Dublin Co-op, and that man is a data man. He knows stats inside out and upside down. He's a lecturer in DCU. And I think he's an emeritus lecturer in a couple of other locations as well, and a really great contributor and very constructive to debates and conversations. And he also sits on the subcommittee for finance and would know an awful lot of the community groups around the city and what they're doing and the effect that they're having, as well as our SICAP partners. I think Paul Rogers still sits on the subcommittee for finance as well. Claire Downey then from the Rediscovery Centre, and she's a new appointment. I don't know her that well, but I know the Rediscovery Centre, which is pretty incredible what they do. And then we have our union rep, Karen Smullen. She comes to some of the meetings. I don't think I've ever met her in person, but she does attend. So I'm moving to the next slide, hopefully, if it responds to me. And I don't know why it's not. So the LCDC remit, what are we about and what is our task? So the key functions, and this is, again, as I stated earlier on, this is lifted off the LCDC website on Dublin City Council's homepage for the LCDC. The first line is the preparation and implementation of the community element of the Dublin City Local Economic and Community Plan 2016 to 2021. That's out of date. That line should read that we are now in the implementation phase of the community element of the Dublin City Local Economic and Community Plan 2024 to 2029. So I was party to the actual preparation and implementation of the community element. We spent probably 2 years. 1 year was assessing the effectiveness of the 2016 to 2021 plan. And then we looked at how we would shape up for the 2024 plan. It took us 3 years actually to get that over the line. And part of that was the COVID interruption to our normal work. We had to pivot quite a bit, and I hate that word pivot because it's just been used so many times, but we really had to be very, very flexible as a team around how we would make the changes that were needed within the LCDC to respond to the emerging needs that happened through the emergency of the COVID pandemic, and particularly with our most vulnerable cohort in the community, and how community teams within DCC responded to that need, engaging with the most remote groups and particularly the most vulnerable groups of individuals. And then our second bullet point on that function is bringing a more joined up approach to local and community development activity in the city. And that, I suppose, is done in a couple of ways. At our meetings, we would have discussions around different matters, but we would invite presenters to come forward on thematic issues. But then our own knowledge base. So, for instance, my work in the community engages me with tons of groups, whether it's through the Wheel or our grant applications that within the Cathedral, I'd have a grant scheme, or my local on the ground community work, or the community bus as an outreach tool. And we would know and have a level of knowledge of community activity that would alert us to emerging need or changing patterns or something that is on our radar that needs to be attended to. And that is brought into the discussions to assist some of the decision making, to make sure that we don't miss the boat with something. And then we coordinate and monitor the social inclusion and community activation programme, SICAP. Now, that's a chunk of money. And from our most recent meeting, I'm just going to pull some of the stats because these minutes aren't up yet. They won't be approved until our next meeting. But the funding that is allocated is enormous into the pot for community fund to fund SICAP. I'm just looking. I think I did write down the amount that they mentioned, and I know I scribbled it in a corner somewhere. But it's something in the order of 6.5 million that spreads across the various different SICAP groups. So we've had presentations from the Liffey Partnership, from the Northwest Partnership, from the North Side Partnership, and the next one we're going to have will be another SICAP presentation from, there's one more still to come in, South Dublin City Partnership. So that is going to help us to, or the South Inner City Partnership. So that's going to help us to really kind of understand the breadth of work and the amount of initiatives that directly impact people on the ground. The councillors need to understand that really well, because if they don't, they're presenting in the council chambers. We're not on an executive report. That's a gap with the LCDC. Our reports do not make it up onto the executive table. So we're looking to have that addressed, and we've had meetings with the DRCD to try and progress that. And, councillors have been, I suppose, lobbied by various members who do attend the meetings to come along and inform themselves and educate themselves about what the LCDC actually does and the impact of that funding application that goes out through the LCDC remit and touches people literally on the ground, the most remote community groups, the smallest groups, the activists who are actually making changes on the ground in local communities and making sure that their work is understood and acknowledged. Then the final bullet on this slide is the approval and funding of the Community Enhancement Programme, the CEP, which builds on and replaces the Community Facilities Scheme, which you probably know about, and RAPID, which I wasn't familiar with. That predated my time. So those two funds are completely out of date. But the Community Enhancement Programme and the Community Centres Fund came through the LCDC. The problem with that is there's a very tiny administrative team within DCC that back up all the LCDC functions. And they're legends as far as I'm concerned. The work that they do, the amount of data that they trawl through, the community groups that they answer questions of every day or contact when they submit an application or they make an inquiry about a particular grant stream of funding, is an enormous task. And the DRCD predetermine what the criteria is going to be for the funds that are going to be allocated to whatever area in the city or country, in fact, because when it's given out, it's distributed throughout the whole country, and it's not just to Dublin City, but this same criteria will apply across the board. And that seems a little bit disproportionate in the sense that we have so much work to do to drill into all of those community groups, to make sure community groups know in the first instance that this stream of funding is available and applicable to them, and then how to get community groups up and running so that they're able to navigate the complex application forms and the criteria that is set down by the local authority or by the DRCD, not. So the DRCD being the Department of Rural and Community Development, they set the criteria. We have no locus of control over that. We have advocated and requested that they give us better lead-in time so that we can actually set up the fund, advertise the criteria, communicate the criteria, support community groups to formulate their applications in a well-considered and timely way, rather than last-minute funding being available and everybody having to rush to get it in at the last minute. And then the issue becomes everything being vouched. And the capacities of some groups are stronger than others. And the ones who are least resourced are the ones who need the funding the most. So the problem for us as a team within the LCDC is looking at realistic projects. Are they going to be able to get vouched receipts for every single thing in a timely fashion? Because if they don't, the problem is the DRCD are going to come after that money and request it back. So it's setting it up to fail if we can't get the right criteria and if we're not meeting the right needs in the right way and in a timely fashion. So we're having this constant tension of, there's a new fund, a stream of funding coming through. Let's see how we can get that out there. And that becomes a bit of a tussle, and we have to see how we can get it done. That team behind the scenes who receive all of those applications, we don't do a fraction of the work that they do. So we wouldn't be able to actually administer this without those people who are on that team. And there's only 4 of them. So Mairead Hughes is one of them. Brenda O'Reilly is another one. Shauna McIntyre is the chief executive, and she has to sign off on everything at the very end. So the decisions are made in the sort of subcommittee setting. And I've been at those meetings, and we literally look at everybody who has met the criteria. So the sort of pre-screening has been done by the administrative team. And then there might be some anomalies. There might be little gaps within 1 or 2 applications, and the team flag those. They might call the group and say, listen, you're missing this piece. Is there any chance you'd be able to get that to us before X date? Because the next meeting of the committee will be taking place. And this is all additional time to the LCDC meeting times. So those subcommittee meetings might be 4 hours of a morning on top of the LCDC meeting, which is usually 2.5 hours, depending on the volume of work that's on the table. So you can imagine that it's a massive task, and then we're having to look at each municipal district within the city. So we have the northeast inner city, the southeast inner city, the southwest inner city, the north side, and the north central, and then the further north. So it's very, very complex, and we have to look at everybody and give a fair option. And then we have to look at the breakdown of what it is that they're looking for. And this is where we start to apply some of the other layers of thinking. So when it whittles down, we have to look at groups and say, for instance, somebody applies for maybe 20 laptops. Have they considered or looked for a sort of a circular economy option on that. Maybe an organization that is repurposing or reconditioning laptops that might be suitable for the purposes that they're seeking them. And we look at those kind of criteria. We look at the sustainable options if they're looking to upgrade their energy or environmental the wrap on a building or the roof or water retention, or if they're doing a community garden, have they considered what is the best option for all of those things? So that's some of the detail on that. The other piece of work that we've covered, and Catherine, you'll give me a nod in terms of if I'm yathering on too much, just pull me in. I'm moving to the next slide. Now, the next slide is going to be very hard to read, and I don't expect you to read it, but this is a slide that I've pulled the image from the Local Economic and Community Plan 2024 and to 2029. Please, please, please make yourselves familiar with this. There are the 6 high-level goals, and that's the overview of those goals and the sub-objectives. And that's just the introduction, but I'm going to pull out one. So I'm moving to the next slide because nobody's going to be able to read that slide. It's just too dense, but I wanted to put it up there so that you would at least see it. So I'm pulling out the high-level goal number 1. And that is goal number 1 is to respond to the climate and biodiversity crises, supporting targeted initiatives to reduce emissions, encourage renewable energy, and restore the city's biodiversity. So we have within that 3 objectives, 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. 1.1 is to expand circular economy activities and services to reduce waste generation and enhance responsible production and consumption. So whenever we're making these decisions, part of our conversation in developing this economic and community plan was looking at how can the city be at its best and what practical things can we do or implement that would really meet this goal. And if we look at circular economy activities, I just referred to that in relation to the finance decisions that are made. That is helpful to have that objective there, because then we can say, okay, this group has met objective 1.1. This is great. They've looked at circular economy. They know exactly what they're doing. They're sourcing in a really sensitive and thought through way that looks at sustainable options instead of creating more and more manufacturing. We're actually looking at somebody who's resourcing themselves really well with whatever they're targeting, and that might be benefiting a social enterprise who is set up to make sure that that's exactly what they do. So it could be somebody linking with Recycle IT, who go around, as they're an NGO, and they go around and collect metal recycling items, and they might be sourcing their materials for whatever the project is that they're developing from that organisation. Then objective 1.2 is to reduce traffic emissions and enhance biodiversity throughout the city. Now, that is not going to be something that we can do a whole lot on as an LCDC, but we put it into this objective because we know that traffic emissions affect people's health. So that would have been, LNOD would have had the stats on that in relation to, she was a knowledge broker, I suppose, was what she would have been called. She knew exactly where to get all the data in relation to respiratory health. She was able to get the latest statistics. She was able to look at the concentrated areas within the city, and that informed our traffic management within those areas. And that then goes to the planning, and it goes to the roads and traffic management for the city. And any decisions that are made have to meet objective 1.2 within this plan. Then objective 1.3 is to increase energy efficiency in all public buildings and support use of renewable energy across the community. So we're not going to be able to, as an LCDC, we're not going to be able to impact the efficiencies in all public buildings, because that's the OPW's job. But they have to abide by this Dublin City Local Economic and Community Plan. What we can do is the decisions that we make to support the use of renewable energy across the community might be, for instance, looking at say, for instance, if a community group is looking to insulate their building, well, isn't that great? Because that's actually looking at energy efficiency. And then they might be looking at connecting up to mains gas. Well, is that really going to be the best thing? Why not get solar panels? We'll suggest maybe to the group to reconsider and get quotes on that. So I hope that makes sense to how that LECP plan gets implemented within. That's just an example, but you can drill into all of the other ones and consider what it is that they would bring to bear. And that's really the final slide. I'd love to have more interaction with yourselves now. I don't know if there's anything in the chat room that we need to look at. If there's anything that you want to ask, I can certainly send on the slides, Sue. Thank you for asking that. I will absolutely send them on. And then what's the next question there? Not all ETBs are administering the REACH funding. Okay. I wasn't aware of that. Sorry. Wait and see now. LWETB. So is that Leitrim? Or where is it? Limerick? Does anybody know who was it that asked that question? PO?
That was Paula.
Is it
I'm not
Longford
sure.
Westmeath?
Longford Westmeath, perhaps.
Longford Westmeath. Okay. Sorry to hear that they're not doing that REACH fund. It is an incredible fund, and it is well worth, if you can access it, I would recommend that you do. But I suppose I can only speak for the LCDC in Dublin City, and it's just really unfortunate if you don't have the opportunity to apply for that. So the agenda for the meetings referred to by me, they're up on the website. They're posted, so you'll see them with the meetings. So I'll give you an agenda oversight here. I have it here, so I've loads of little scribbly notes on it from my last meeting, which was the 26th of March. Now, the minutes for this meeting have not yet been approved and signed off, so therefore they're not up on the website. The January meeting is, however. And so our first thing was literally the welcome, and when we meet in person we usually have a cup of coffee and introduce ourselves if we haven't already met, and we'll always have a guest speaker at our meetings. And so the first area is usually on presentations. So if somebody is invited to present, they will do that. So we had a presentation from Kimberly Tully and Michelle O'Hara, Engaging Dementia, and it was about the dementia cafes. So they came in and gave a talk about the various different dementia cafes around the city and what they're doing and how they're doing it. We had Ray O'Donovan came to present on the nighttime economy, and part of his conversation was about the Purple Flag scheme, and we had a lot of questions for him. I didn't realise this until the meeting, and most of us in the meeting didn't, but the defined term for nighttime economy is anything that goes on in the city from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So I asked, from a community perspective, what is being provided for young people between 6 p.m. and say 10 p.m. Because one of the issues that we're having in the city is this perception of an unsafe city. And when people see a congregation of young people gathering in the street because they've nowhere else to go, because there's no community centres, they feel intimidated by that presence because they think they're up to no good. They may not be up to no good. They may be up to no good and they may not be. We don't know that. But immediately people's default response to that or reaction to that is 1, fear, and 2, suspicion, and 3, crossing the road to avoid them, instead of engaging with them and, positively engaging with them and seeing, well, what is it? Are they going? Is there something on? Is there a club? Is there something happening? And is there some way that we can support that a little bit more? So there's some of the questions that we were asking of Ray. But Ray O'Donovan is only one man, and he's a one-man team, and he's tasked with the entire city's plan of the nighttime economy. And I just think that's ridiculous for one man to be tasked with that. And we advocated from our meeting that more resources would be put into that, because it's quite a considerable feature of city life. There is a high need for residents within the city to be supported, people who live and work in the city. It's not just about tourism. It's not just about the entertainment economy. It's about a quality of evening experiences, as if you were living in a village in the outskirts or in the suburbs, that literally you would be entertained just as equally. Just because you're not in the city centre doesn't mean you can't have opportunities to access public spaces for quality entertainment and quality of life improvements. We had a lovely presentation as well from Greg Swift and Shauna McIntyre on empowering your future, and that's in relation to work and the changes that are happening and the legislative changes that have impacted people who are self-employed. Then the next one was on the SICAP and LCDC funded programmes, and it was Paul Rogers presenting on the Dublin Northside Partnership, and he gave a really comprehensive oversight of that. Then part 2 of the agenda, part 3 of the agenda, that was part 2, the welcome was part 1. Part 3 was confirmation of the minutes from the 29th of January, and they're up, and any matters arising, they're all up on the website, so they're free for you to read those in your own time. The LCDC business matters then came into play. And so those LCDC business matters included the local enhancement programme. There was €675,260 to be distributed. And that's the Department of Rural and Community Developments. And it was agreed in our meeting that we had 220 applications. The subcommittee were to make some decisions and make some recommendations, and it was agreed that we would authorise those recommendations by email by agreement, and if there were any queries that we would liaise with the subcommittee following the meeting. And that the only reason that we did that rather than ratifying it at the meeting was because of the sheer shortage of time, because the DRCD had implemented a very short closing window, and there was not the time to allow for a considered meeting where we would all be presented with all of the options to allocate the funding. But the subcommittee presented us with the suite within 5 days of that meeting, which was on the 26th of March. Within 5 days, we had those recommendations, and we had an opportunity to go through every single one of them. And I have to say, they really did crack the nut of it, and they made some very good decisions, and I approved in full. Then our part B of part 4 of the meeting was Health and Wellbeing Subcommittee, and we're going to look at that in May 2025 because we're going to have a presentation on it, and it's going to be tied in with our thematic meeting for May, which is on housing. And we're also going to incorporate in the Community Safety Forum meeting into the next meeting. So what we've looked at is the next schedule of meetings right up to March of next year. And I'll come to that in a moment, but that was part and parcel of that decision. The LCDC then, part C, was the LCDC impact report, and Mairead and Anessa are working on a draft format for that because the impact report, it's very early to have impact from 2024's decisions because the goals have only just been launched since September. So they're looking at how to collate that information and draw that data down, and working with some partners to do that in an effective way, and something that's meaningful and actually helps to create the next iteration for year 2 of that plan. So then the monitoring and evaluation it's a beast of a piece of work. Like it's enormous. The mid-year review for that will be enormous. And then the LECP goal and focus for future meetings. May, I mentioned already, is Housing and Community Safety Forum, and also the Health and Wellbeing Subcommittee. In July, we're looking at the economy and any economic benefits that can be brought to bear. September, we'll focus on climate. November, we'll look at the arts and culture. January, we'll look at health and well-being. March, we'll look at community and community engagement. And there's lots of things that fit in under those. So I think, you know, it's not a simple agenda, but it's always full, and usually it's tight for time. So if we feel something is rushed, usually something will be communicated out on email after the meeting is done, and we'll follow on with that. I hope that answers your question, Pat, in relation to the agendas. And the slides, yes, will be shared. Sorry, did somebody want to ask a question?
I was just saying there's loads of questions flying in here. If you can't use the chat or use the raise hand icon, just feel free to unmute yourselves and ask away. But yeah, if you can use the chat, then that's great. And feel free to answer each other's questions in the chat as well. So I don't know how many we'll get around to. You mentioned just there about that you have the outline of what you're going to mention, what you're going to be talking about. And I know that was only like something that's very new to the LCDC.
Yeah.
Did you have to push for that, or how did
Yes,
you?
it was something I had specifically requested when I came back onto it, because I don't think we had enough time to prepare. Agendas come out very much, at the last minute, because the team are so pressurized. I'm the last one to criticize them. After seeing the amount of work that they do, I'd be the very last person to criticize them. The beautiful thing about the LCDC is the collaborative nature of it, and having a voice at the table that is never put down. I have never experienced being dismissed. I think people in the past may have had that experience, but I have never had that experience. Firstly, I wouldn't tolerate it. I would be very intolerant of that. I'd be kind of questioning the manner of things, but I have had the best experience on this committee. I think it's probably one of the most effective committees that I've ever participated in, and I've been on a fair few. Hence my aversion to anything that's just a talk shop. I really do see the effectiveness of it. And when you make a request, it is always incorporated in. I've never had something rejected. But I would kind of do that strategically. If I have something that I want to bring to the table and request change on, for instance, one of the things I've advocated for is that conversation with the DRCD. And when I suggested that, Dahi Downey actually wrote to the department, and we collated a letter. We sent it around after our meeting for any views. So there was a sort of a draft put together on how to advocate for better lead-in times for our funding. Now, the DRCD have yet to respond to that in an effective way, because we're still getting those short lead-in times. But the letter has been sent. It's on record, and that's going back 2 years. The most recent response to it, I suppose, in inverted commas response, is when we had an invitation to go to a consultation with the marketing team that were hired by the DRCD about how they effectively communicate around the LCDC function. And I said, well, you don't effectively, we went to this forum where we discussed the various different issues. I don't know if anybody else here within this room was party to any of those discussions. But I found that actually, again, I went in cynically. It seems to be my default when it comes to these things, but I'm kind of wondering, what do they want to do with this? Do they want to kind of control the narrative a little bit more, or are they opening themselves up to be a little bit more transparent? Because I don't think the LCDC function is as transparent as it should be. For instance, I think people should be able to dial in and view the meeting similarly to some of the other SPCs that would be viewable online. And when people are advocating that it's actually on record and can be viewed by councillors or community members or community groups. And I think that should be a facility that should be available, because I think making it more transparent is easier to understand. You can see the breadth of work that goes on, and you get to put a face to these people who are heads of organisation or, community representatives or public sector representatives who are working really, really hard. I don't know anybody who's a slacker on the team, to be fair. And I do think that the councillors could be more present. That's one criticism I would have. It shouldn't just be, a junket that they put their name down and that they get acknowledged. Their attendance isn't noted, for instance. So if they don't show up to meetings, that's only noted by us. It's not noted anywhere else. So that should be incentivised, that they should be there and present and accounted for, and it should go into the executive book, but it doesn't. So we're advocating through Councillor Moore to have those changes made within the local authority and through the DRCD. So I hope that makes sense. I kind of rambled a little bit there, sorry. I'm looking at some of the questions here, and I'm hoping I get to read them all because my screen jumps a little. Question in relation to organised funding for access, all accessibility. Our needs are not met within the plan, and it's not pushed enough. Gina, thanks for that. Actually, one of the things, so there's a couple of things that have been discussed at our meetings. Excuse me 2 seconds, I just want to put on a light and it's getting a little dull here. Can't see my own scrawly writing. So one of the things that we discussed in relation to accessibility is the walkability of the city and safe access and some of the street furniture. And we have advocated for those changes to take place. That so there's the first thing that has to happen is there has to be an audit of that. And so people have to actually go out and do that work. But we also meet with the the disability officers. So I'm on the secretariat for the Dublin City as well, and we have representation in the group for that. So we
Hi,
include people.
can I just say, oh, I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Gina here.
Gina, it's
I,
Kelley.
oh, Kelly, my apology. I just want to highlight there that, yeah, we've done some of that, but I just think in terms of funding, we need to get more funding in terms of doing more walkabouts, in terms of every city in the country. That's
Yeah.
sort of what we should be doing under the LECDP or on LC. Oh, sorry, I'm like you know with the acronym.
I
Yeah,
know, and I'm trying to think
no,
where
it's
that
my
might come
apology.
in.
So I think in terms for wheelchairs and guide dogs and people who use long cane and even buggies and everything, if you could take note of that and
Yeah.
how can they distribute the funding in order to accommodate all our cities around the country, because it's very important. That's my point there.
I
Sorry for
absolutely
putting
agree
you
with
there,
you.
Kelly.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Gina. I'm writing out the question: how can funding be distributed to facilitate effective audit of accessibility?
Yeah,
Okay.
effective accessibility and funding. So maybe audit and effective accessibility. Maybe the three words might be practical there.
Okay, I think that might come up for the May meeting, so I'm going to send Shauna an
Yeah,
email on that to make sure that it gets asked at the
if
next
you wouldn't
meeting because
mind, I'll bring
the
it
Health
back
and
to my
Wellbeing
meeting. Yeah,
Subcommittee, sorry,
I
the
could
Health
bring
and
that.
Sub,
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah.
yeah, because the Health and Wellbeing Subcommittee is going to address the May meeting, and as well as that, the housing one. So, now
Well, it was
unfortunately,
terms of that, and just sorry to hog you guys. In terms of accessibility housing, we have been fighting for accessibility housing between the
yeah,
council as well. So we kind of need to maybe add that as well, actually. But that
well, I
would
think
actually, but that would actually apply to all parts of the country as well,
would that
not
go to
just
the
Galway.
planning SPC though, in relation
Well,
to
that would
the
go to the planning SPC. Yeah, I think you're
yeah,
right, Ken. So
I think
making
so,
them
but
that definitely it would
I
be
will
very good.
definitely raise it anyway because I think you're
Good.
dead
Yeah.
right in terms of the assessment of it because retrospective
Yeah.
buildings like with the problem with Dublin City is an awful lot of the housing is in listed buildings and
Yeah.
accessibility isn't always a feature in some of the older constructions that date to the 1890s and
So
early
that's why
1900s.
we kind of fight as well for under the housing sections here. We kind of housing SPC. We fight for accessibility housing. So
Great.
you know, they're my point. So I'll shut up
Thank
now
you,
as well.
Gina. No, that's
Sorry,
brilliant.
guys.
No, thanks.
So the next
Um,
question, Gina,
I
I
thought
have
I'd
down is from
just
Mike Edwards. All LECPs are different, but reps need to be aware of the content and how it is used to benefit or affect the communities. Absolutely. They do differ, and I suppose looking at your local LECP plan is essential. And if you don't have the sort of rigors of that, everything that you do needs to hook back to the high level goals that should be within it. The framework should be the same. The content will be localized based on the local authority. I know some local authorities engaged a third party to do their LEC plan. We did it ourselves, and it was brain damage. I'll just not. It was horrible. It was a really long, laborious, debatable, argumentative, confrontational piece of work because people felt very passionately about different elements of it, and we really had to work hard to tease it all out. And we ended up bringing in an external facilitator to mediate some of the meetings because it got quite heated at times, but it was all very constructive. If anything, I think it came out better because of that. So yeah, thank you for that, Mike. As a PPN
um,
rep, how do you get feedback to the PPN members and bring information from the members to the LCDC meetings. So that's a mixture of sources, I suppose, and it is something that I'm trying to work on a little bit better. We formed a small linkage group, and I'm on the secretariat, so I bring it to the secretariat. I communicate it to the PPN support worker. We've a super team. I'm going to brag now. We have Ruth and Siobhan, and they're just amazing. They're really, really good at what they do. And the communication from them out to all the membership is really, really effective. And then on the ground, I would literally, if I know about something in particular and I know a particular group is looking for something, I'll contact them directly and I'll go, listen, this is happening. You need to know about this. And will you tell everybody in your area? So it's that kind of bird on a wire network, as well as the formal communication lines. And then all the community reps within DCC, they send out their own newsletters and flyers. So if something is happening and it's hot and heavy in relation to community, it'll go out through the community connectors. And they're great, like Lois Salmon and Colin and Brian. There's a whole load of them. They're just really, really good, and they're on the ground and they know all the local groups.
Can I just add there as well? You mentioned the linkage group being one of the methods of communication. The linkage groups, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, they might also be called working groups in your PPNs, or discussion groups. It's basically a discussion group within each of the pillars. So you'll have an environmental working group or linkage group, a community and voluntary, and a social inclusion. And all of the group members and the representatives come along to that discussion group and share what's going on in each of their committees. And they're at varying levels in each PPN. Some of them have some very well established groups, and some are kind of just beginning to get them up and running. And so just so you're aware of that's a method in your PPN as well. That's what the linkage group is.
Cool. Shudavi Balan, you asked, I hope I pronounced that correctly, but you asked a question: how does the evaluation committee work on scoring the projects, and what's the score metrics followed? So the criteria is as the department set it down. So we don't have any autonomy in relation to that. So the DRCD will set, the Department of Rural and Community Development will set out the criteria, and regardless of what the project is, that criteria must be met. Then after that, we link everything back to the LECP plan, and we use the scoring metrics in relation to the objectives that are set out in relation to the fund. So where possible, that circular economy is used, that it is renewable energy that is used, and so on. That, you know, using that goal objective 1 as an example, as working example of that. So that's where the metrics come from. Thanks, Ursula, for your comment. Mike Edwards, it would also be good for reps to have a chat prior to LCDC meetings to ensure the important issues or our votes on funding are fully understood. And that does happen to a point, but I suppose there's a finance subcommittee that make those decisions. And if I'm not on that committee, I can't be party to that. It comes afterwards for final ratification, but that's after everything has already been thrashed out and worked through. And I suppose they do have meetings that are separate to it. So I'm not sure votes on funding are fully understood. How do you mean? Sorry, Mike, is there something I'm missing on that? Is Mike still with us?
I think Mike had to leave.
Okay. I'm not sure that I fully understand what he means about votes on funding are fully understood, because it doesn't come down to a vote. It comes down to cutting your cloth to your measure. You may have 130,000 so for instance, we might have, use an example of €120,000, and we have 5 local authority municipal areas. So we have to split that funding out, and we try to do it proportionately. And based on the number of applications, we might be able to give 10,000 in a lump sum to one large group within that area. So that's 50 grand gone. We're left with 70 to distribute. We break that down across all of the groups based on the number of applications. We might be able to split it out and give 3 here, 5 there, 7 there, but never as high as 10. There's usually only one that it would be up as high as 10. It depends on the criteria, and it depends on what has been set down. But that's just
Hey,
an example of
could I
that.
just ask you, Gina, here again? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Does that mean in terms of, let's say, for example, Galway, we have Galway City Council and Galway City County. So does that have to be split between the city
Yes,
and the
I
county?
would say
Okay.
so. It's usually
Ah,
done in municipal district, so that there's a fair
oh,
shake
right,
of the bag.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
But
Thank
again,
you.
that's something, Gina, you should ask your LCDC rep in your area, because they would, I'm sure they would have sight of that. They would have
Yeah.
been made aware
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
it, you know.
Okay. Thanks a
Um,
million.
Not at all, you're welcome. Tips on approaching funding sources for new community centres. Go back to the LECP. Your LECP plan, the local economic and community plan, that is your best friend when it comes to approaching any funding source. And the more of those goals that you hit with your application succinctly, clearly, demonstrably, and anything that you do must be vouched. If you can use circular economy, do. If you can use social enterprise, do. If you can use an NGO, do. If you can create employment, do. And state all of that and really get people championing it. The more people who collaborate on your application, the better. So, but there has to be one head of funding. There has to be one organisation that's ultimately responsible. But if you can spread the win and demonstrate the win of why that community centre is essential to develop, then you're going to be on a winner. And it'll be very hard for them to say no if you meet all of the criteria. I hope that makes sense, Sebastian. It's not easy to do.
I'm just giving you a time check. It's not to rush it, but we are at 8:30. But I'd say
Okay,
another 10 minutes or so I might get through the
great.
questions if
Thanks.
people are okay
Yeah,
to
no
hang on.
problem. I don't know how many more I have. Like, oh, it's 16
Uh,
more. Oh my God.
a lot of them
Okay.
are unanswered, so they're not all questions. Don't worry.
All right. Thanks. Shredevi Balan, does the LCDC have team building activities? Oh, I jumped. With other committees like other SPCs, Peace Plus, etc. Yes, we do. And I drive the Holy Hot Wheels in the Cathedral. I have a little minibus, a 16-seater. So what I've done in the past is I've taken people out on site visits. So we've gone to visit community gardens. We've gone to visit the Northside Partnership, for instance. We've brought the Community Foundation to see the sort of Coolock projects and so on. There's a couple of things that we would support, and we use all our own resources to try and do that. And sure, who wouldn't go to a cup of tea where there's a bit of hospitality? Who wouldn't show up? So we do try to arrange those kind of social things. And at Christmas, our PPN network met up in the Hyatt Hotel. Not everybody could make it. It's a very pressure time of year. So our regular meetings would be really well attended, in fairness. And we've had some very, very good training going on with Eleonora, who's been our consultant for training. And Ruth and Siobhan have kind of canvassed our entire membership to see what kind of training would benefit us the most as a PPN network to be more effective. And that's working out really well. And we have a summer school coming up. So that's really exciting. How does the LECP development plan influence, interact with the development plan? And do you make submissions or just influence the councillors? It's a little bit of everything. So we do kind of make submissions and make recommendations, and then the councillors are definitely our champions. You know, they speak for us when they're very engaged with this. They're very passionate about it. And then we've had people who've been passionate in the past and have participated very strongly and have moved on to other committees, and they still champion the cause. Like Tara Deasy would be one person that has been involved. Mannix Flynn is another person who's been really involved, and they've moved on to other things, but they still have LCDC at their heart, and they can always make references back. And they're also very connected into anybody who's involved in the LCDC, so they will, where possible, support anything that comes up. The LECPs are integrated with a collaborative process and a shared focus on achieving a more inclusive, sustainable city. Alana, thank you. I think, is there a question in it though?
I think that was just in answer
No, I was
to
just
the...
answering it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. And Caroline Nahabre. Caroline, a couple of questions that you might have answered by now. Are the same statutory bodies on every LCDC? I don't know, actually.
No, they're not.
Okay. Good to know.
They differ based on the area.
Okay.
They vary. Yeah.
So, and that's good to have that clarified around the mandated to include representatives from the local authorities and state agencies. Again, it's all partnership related. And I suppose the hot issues in a community will also dictate and influence who gets co-opted in. And would also, oh gosh, sorry, somebody has a cardiac call. Mike, I hope he's all right. He must be a community responder. The difference between an LCDC and the SPC. So do they overlap or coordinate activities, say on climate change? So yes, Claire Wheeler is a member of the LCDC, and she would use the climate change, the opportunity to contribute to the conversation around climate change, and would always chip in or contribute or make suggestions in relation to environmental issues. Do we sit on local community safety partnerships? Now, there's a hot topic. So the JPCs have collapsed, are being made defunct, and the community safety partnerships are supposed to be the next avenue. I've only seen one that's effective, and it's only partially effective. So it's a work in progress. So I'd say watch this space. I'm going to hold my wish on that. I'm meeting the chief superintendent on Wednesday. God love him. So we'll be having a chat around, city safety and some of the issues that prevail. So I attend the meetings, and that is not required of me, I suppose. But I think it should be something that connects people in. Through PPNs, if you're nominated.
Again,
This
that's
isn't-
Alana
great.
giving an answer.
Thank you, Alana. You're brilliant. Is it Ethel McKenna? Or LCDC's advisory and learning only? Do they have any power to insist that something is done? So it's democratic, and it's also factual. So as an LCDC member, I wouldn't go in half-baked. I go in as prepared as I can possibly be. If I'm going to present something and request something, I try to have my homework done before I bring it to the table. And I also know who else is at the table, so I know what buttons to press. And I suppose that only comes over with time in relation to who you're trying to influence and how you're trying to achieve change. And I suppose ultimately the question is, what are you trying to achieve? Who's going to benefit the most? And whose hearts do you need to win over in order to get that over the line? And they're the three questions that I would ask myself before I bring anything to the table. And usually then people will kind of pony up. They can very rarely say no to something that's a good idea and that's well thought through and considered. And you might have a pre-meeting meeting with somebody to say, listen, are you interested in this? Is this something that you'd be passionate about? Would you be happy to co-present on it? And they might be a key stakeholder on the LCDC just to get something considered over the line. And then we've Paula O'Connor, you've put in a link there to the Monaghan County Council. Thanks for that. Safety audit carried out in Monaghan is a good example of community organisations demonstrating what can be done with small funding. Very good. I'm going to have a look at that. Thank you. And another one that's interesting, actually, Gina, this might be interesting for you, and I don't know if you've heard about it before, but it's the usual. Every area should have a community crime prevention officer assigned, and they have a framework called Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, CPTED for short. Another one of the acronyms to add to your list, and the gift that keeps giving. So CPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, is looking at all the factors of lighting, construction, accessibility, parking, access to buildings, shops, visibility for people who may have other support needs, that their needs are met and understood.
Would it be possible you could email that to me? I'll have a proper look at that. That'd be great.
Yeah, do you know what, Gina, are you on LinkedIn? Do you use it at all?
No, but
Well, there's a chap on there. If you do have a look at it, his name is Sergeant Graham Kavanagh. I don't know what part of the country you're in, but he's based in Lee
I'm in Galway.
Okay.
Any GCC group here in Galway?
Well, there would be crime prevention. There would be a crime prevention officer assigned to Galway. But CP TED, or crime prevention through environmental design,
What you do, email TCC in Galway, and it can email it to me, and I'll look into it there, if that's possible.
I can
could
send
you
out
send?
any links to whatever email you registered for tonight. I'll send it
Yeah.
out in the follow-up email.
That
Brilliant.
would be fantastic, yeah, and I can follow up on that. That'd be
Brilliant.
great.
Because
Thanks,
Graham
lady.
puts up
Thanks,
loads of really good posts on LinkedIn.
yeah,
So
thanks,
if you
Catherine and
can
Kelley.
engage with
Thank
that,
you.
it's really useful.
No problem.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. Wait, to see now. The JPC, yeah, Joint Policing Committee. Sorry about that. Another acronym for the list. So I think that's all the questions answered, is it?
By the looks of it, you've got them all. Did anyone get missed, or is there any final questions before we go?
Can I just ask a question there?
Yeah, go for
It's
it.
Fiona here from Carlow PPN. How do you think the PPN workers are best placed when it comes to the management and organisation of their reps attending these meetings? Also, how to manage attendance of reps and how that works. I mean, to be the most effective. I mean, it's been great listening to your conversation and your presentation on, especially the early part of it, where you were talking about the monitoring and the evaluation. I think that's really important because I actually haven't heard that being done at all, and I've been actually questioning that myself. But where's the reports? What's the feedback from what's going on? You know. But just to say, like, how can the PPN workers, the coordinator, and the administrator, because they work very closely with the reps, they're very close with everything that's going on. So
Yeah.
you know, how can we be most effective as workers, do you think?
I suppose I can only go from my experience, because before we had Ruth and Siobhan, because we've had a couple of people along with Ruth, but before we had Ruth, we were floundering, straight up. It was not functioning particularly well. And Ruth has a particular set of skills, to quote Liam Neeson, and she will use them. She's great. She's got a really good listening ear. And I think hearing people and understanding the perspectives that people are bringing to the table, getting to know people. So one-to-one meetings in the first instance to get to know everybody on the different reps, and then canvassing for the various training needs and understanding, doing an audit of that. And we got great support from Dublin City Council in accessing that. And we're also very lucky in that our support workers are located within the volunteer centre, which is an NGO. So they're separate to DCC. They're not located within the local authority. So there's a level of autonomy and, I suppose, independence from the local authority. But yet the local authority will absolutely support them to the nth degree. They measure what they're doing against, I suppose, the criteria and their capacity, because there's only so many hours in a day. But they work very strategically into what they can achieve, and they have a very serious work plan that they bring to the Secretariat. And the summer school is a response to some of that identified need that was, I suppose, discovered through those conversations one-to-one, but also the research pieces that were done. There were questionnaires sent out that everybody engaged with. In Dublin City, we have over 1,000 groups who are members of the PPN. We probably have about 40% active members, really. And that's enough, to be honest. And one of the issues that we do have consistently is that people are joining simply to apply for funding. And that should not be the only reason people apply to be a member of the PPN. The value of the PPN is to influence decision making from a grassroots level right through to the very top of the local authority, and being party to and understanding the bureaucratic shape that this all takes, over time. So it's really, really, it's really strong. Yeah. I hope that answers, Fiona. Is it helpful?
Yes, very good. Thanks so much.
And I would definitely have a chat with Ruth, give her a call.
Oh yeah, I know Ruth
I think
well, yeah.
all the workers definitely throughout the country should be networking with each other. I think
Oh,
that's another layer of support that you have, because you can pick each other's brains on how to crack the nut, because everybody comes up against the same wall on a regular basis. It mightn't be on the same day, but you can learn so much from each other, and that's really just about hearing what everybody does to get through any given day.
yeah, I really believe in close relations, networking as much as possible, talking it out. I believe in that also, in person. Bring it
Yeah.
back in person as well.
Oh,
Thanks so much.
definitely.
Thanks.
Thank you. Has anyone else anything they want to throw in the mix?
I think that's it in terms of questions. There was a final one there about can a rep from a community group serve a seat in the JPCs, and then Alana correcting me as well. Thank you, Alana. Mentioning how they're being replaced by the local community safety partnerships. So I know that there are seats for JPCs open for nominations from PPN members. I assume it will be the same for the local community safety partnerships. Do you know anything about that, Kelley?
I will know after Wednesday.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, I'm going to pick the super's brain and see what he has in store for me, because I think they're struggling at the moment, and that's really important to kind of support that, because the community safety forums can't just be another talk shop. They have to be effective ways for the community to advocate for themselves, and it's really important to work in partnership with the guards. They have a tough enough job any given day, so need to make sure that we do our best to kind of get the best from them and give them the support they need from us, because we have so many avenues into that. And I just see there's something up there about Devi, you mentioned about why LCDC members are organising meetings during working hours. Volunteers feel it's hard to attend, and yes, I agree. However, the business of the local authority happens 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And it's very, very rare that they'll ever step outside that framework in Dublin City Council. They just don't have the capacity. And I'm very, very lucky as an employee in my work, in community work, that I have the autonomy to set my own hours. So I can basically overwork as much as I like, within reason. Gavin tries to rein me in now and again, but I mean, here I am, it's almost 9 o'clock, and this is work related, but I am passionate about community. I see why it's important, and I'm very lucky to have an employer that respects that and relieves me to go and attend those meetings as a priority, because it benefits the whole community. So yeah, I get the pain of that, Shrdevi, but unfortunately that's the way local authorities operate.
And in mentioning that it's almost 9 o'clock, I think it's a good time to stop for the night. Thanks everyone for coming along and for your questions and your input. And thank you so much, Kelley, for the great presentation. Hey, thanks a million, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
good evening.